The foundations were laid. The story had begun. But beneath the eternal stars of Mesopotamia, something extraordinary was stirring. In the generations that followed those first climate refugees who transformed wetlands into fertile fields, their descendants faced a new challenge. Success had bred complexity. The simple agricultural settlements scattered between the rivers were growing, merging, evolving into something the world had never seen before. What began as necessity would become revolution. What started as survival would become the blueprint for every city that would ever rise. The dawn broke gentle and golden across the wetlands of southern Mesopotamia, 6,000 years before Christ. Across the fertile plain that would one day be called Uruk, morning mist rose from countless irrigation channels, like the breath of the earth itself. But something had changed in the rhythm of this ancient landscape, where once scattered families had worked small plots along the riverbanks. Now the sound of thousands of voices echoed across the marshlands, calling to one another in the early light. The age of villages was ending. The age of cities had begun. It started quietly, as all great transformations do. Along the banks of the Euphrates, where Telbrak had grown from a humble farming settlement into something larger, the descendants of those first climate refugees faced a new challenge. Success had bred complexity. As their agricultural innovations fed more people, as their irrigation networks grew more sophisticated, as their trade with distant lands expanded, the simple bonds of kinship that had held small communities together began to strain under the weight of thousands of souls living in close proximity. They needed something unprecedented, a way to organize human society on a scale that had never existed before. But it was at Uruk, rising magnificently from the alluvial plains near the confluence of ancient waterways, that humanity would take its most daring leap into the unknown. Here, where the goddess Inanna was said to have first walked among mortals, the descendants of wetland farmers attempted something that would have seemed impossible to their ancestors. They built a city, not merely a large village, not simply an expanded settlement, but a planned metropolis designed to house 50,000 human souls, when most people still lived in extended family groups of 20 or 30. Uruk became not merely a settlement, but a city of remarkable innovation, prototype for urban life itself. The scale was breathtaking. Uruk stretched across nearly 1,500 acres, its massive walls rising from the Iraqi plain like artificial cliffs of sun-dried brick. These weren't simple barriers against wild animals, but sophisticated fortifications, nearly 6 miles in circumference, punctuated by towers and gates that controlled the flow of people and goods. In the flat landscape of ancient Iraq, approaching travelers could see Uruk's walls shimmering in the desert heat from miles away, a testament to human ambition, written in mud and stone. Within those protective walls, life moved with a complexity that would have astounded earlier generations. The city was laid out with careful planning, its streets arranged not by accident, but by design. Residential quarters spread outward from central plazas, each neighborhood connected by pathways that channeled foot traffic and donkey caravans through the urban landscape. Drainage systems carried away waste and stormwater, while wells and systems ensured fresh water reached every corner of the metropolis. But at Uruk's heart stood something that transcended mere urban planning: the great temple complex dedicated to Anu, god of the heavens, and Inanna, goddess of love, fertility, and war. Here rose the world's first monumental ziggurat, a stepped pyramid of mud brick that soared nearly 100 feet above the Mesopotamian plain. Its golden brown walls, smoothed with bitumen and decorated with geometric patterns, caught the light of dawn and held it like a beacon visible across the wetlands. This ziggurat was more than architecture. It was humanity's first attempt to bridge the gap between earth and heaven, between the mortal world of daily life and the eternal realm of the gods. At its summit sat a small temple room where priests performed the daily rituals. that ensured divine favor flowed down to the 50,000 souls living in the shadow of its walls. The ziggurats' influence extended far beyond spiritual matters. Around its base, the temple complex served as the city's economic heart. Here, grain was stored in massive warehouses, their cool interiors protecting the harvest that fed the urban population. Here, craftsmen worked in specialized workshops producing pottery, textiles, and metalwork that would trade as far as Afghanistan and Egypt. Here, administrators coordinated the complex logistics of urban life, organizing work crews, distributing rations, maintaining the irrigation networks that kept the city alive. And here, in the quiet rooms where temple scribes worked by oil lamplight, humanity crossed another threshold that would change the course of history forever. Faced with the impossible task of managing a city larger than anything the world had ever seen, these practical administrators began pressing simple marks into soft clay tablets. At first, these were nothing more than accounting records, symbols for grain, sheep, oil, nuts. A curved line meant barley, a circle with lines meant sheep. Simple pictographs that any administrator could recognize, pressed into clay with reed styluses and dried in the Mesopotamian sun. But necessity drives innovation, and the demands of urban life pushed these early scribes to expand their simple system. They needed to record not just what existed, but when transactions occurred, who was responsible, what quantities were involved. The pictographs began to evolve, becoming more abstract, more flexible. A mark that once meant barley could be combined with others to mean barley ration, or barley delivery, or barley debt. This humble beginning, born from the practical needs of feeding 50,000 people, became the birth of writing itself, the first form of human expression preserved beyond memory, known as cuneiform, meaning wedge-shaped, for the distinctive marks made by reed styluses in clay. This early writing system developed with remarkable speed. Within generations, what had begun as simple inventory lists evolved into a sophisticated system capable of capturing laws, stories, prayers, and dreams. Scribal schools emerged near the temple complex, where young men learned the hundreds of symbols needed to read and write in this revolutionary new medium. For the first time in human history, human thoughts could survive beyond the span of human life. Knowledge could accumulate across generations. Stories could be preserved exactly as their authors intended. The oral traditions that had carried human culture for millennia could finally be written down, ensuring they would never be lost to the vagaries of memory. Trade was transforming, as dramatically as writing. From Uruk's gates, merchant caravans departed on journeys that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations. They traveled the great rivers northward into the mountains of Turkey, seeking copper and silver. They crossed the Syrian desert to reach the cedar forests of Lebanon. They sailed down the Persian Gulf to trade with the mysterious cities of the Indus Valley, bringing back exotic goods that spoke of civilizations equally sophisticated, developing in parallel across the ancient world. Most precious of all was lapis lazuli, that brilliant blue stone, quarried in the mountains of Afghanistan, carried across 1,000 miles of desert and mountain to reach the workshops of Uruk. Here, master craftsmen carved it into beads and amulets that caught sunlight like tiny pieces of sky, fallen to earth, symbols of wealth and status that connected Mesopotamian cities to trade networks spanning from the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was happening in the minds and hearts of Uruk's citizens themselves. Living in a city of 50,000 required new forms of social organization, new ways of thinking about community and belonging. The simple face-to-face relationships that had governed village life became impossible when neighbors might number in the hundreds rather than dozens. New social hierarchies emerged based not on kinship but on specialization and skill. At the top stood the priesthood, guardians of the sacred knowledge that maintained harmony between gods and mortals. Below them came the administrators and scribes, whose literacy gave them power in an increasingly complex world. Craftsmen formed their own groups, organized around shared trades. Potters with potters, metalworkers with metalworkers, each developing specialized techniques passed down through apprenticeships rather than family lines. Yet, for all its complexity, life in Uruk retained the gentle rhythm that had characterized earlier settlements. The workday still followed the ancient pattern of sunrise and sunset. Families still gathered around evening fires to share meals and stories. Children still played in dusty courtyards, while their mothers ground grain and spun wool. The gods still watched over daily life, their presence felt in every sunrise, every successful harvest, every child born healthy into the world. On warm evenings, when the heat of the day had faded, and the first stars appeared in the Iraqi sky, music drifted through Uruk's neighborhoods. Harps and flutes carved from local wood or ivory echoed softly through narrow streets, their melodies telling stories without words, tales of gods and heroes, love and loss, the eternal human themes that connected city dwellers to their ancestors who had first settled between the rivers. The success of Uruk inspired imitation throughout Mesopotamia. Other cities began to rise along the riverbanks. With its great ziggurat dedicated to the moon god Nana. E02, where pilgrims came to honor Enki the Wise. Nippur, where Enlil, god of storms, held court. Each developed its own character, its own patron deity, its own specializations in craft and trade. Yet all followed the basic template that Uruk had established. These early cities weren't merely larger versions of villages. They represented a fundamental shift in how humans understood themselves and their relationship to the world. For the first time, people could live entire lives without directly producing their own food, instead specializing in crafts or administration or religious service. For the first time, human society could support the luxury of full-time scholars, artists and innovators, whose work enriched life beyond mere survival. The urban revolution spreading across Mesopotamia created something that had never existed before. Civilization in the truest sense, a way of life based on cities, writing, specialized labor, and complex social organization. These innovations would spread outward from the Iraqi plains to influence every subsequent human society, creating the foundation upon which all later civilizations would build. Yet even as they created these unprecedented urban centers, the people of Uruk and its sister cities maintained their connection to the rhythms of the natural world. Their calendar still followed the phases of the moon and the flooding of the rivers. Their festivals still celebrated planting and harvest. Their gods still embodied the forces of nature: sun and moon, storm and flood, the fertile earth that sustained all life. As night settled over the great city of Uruk, as oil lamps flickered to life in windows throughout the residential quarters, as families gathered for evening meals in courtyards where date palms rustled in the desert breeze, something profound had been accomplished. Humanity had learned to live together in ways that amplified rather than diminished their collective potential. The foundations laid between two rivers were proving strong enough to support not just individual survival, but the flowering of arts, sciences, literature and learning that would define human civilization for millennia to come. In the temples, scribes worked by lamplight, pressing wedge-shaped marks into clay tablets that would preserve human thoughts and dreams for future generations. In the workshops, craftsmen perfected techniques that would influence artisans across the known world. In the residential quarters, families told stories that would eventually be written down as the first great works of literature. Under the eternal stars of Mesopotamia, these urban pioneers rested peacefully in their city of mudbrick and human ambition, unaware that their revolutionary experiment in living together was creating the templates for every city that would ever rise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new innovations, and the slow, patient work of refining urban life into an art form. But tonight, in the world's first true city, 50,000 people slept safely behind walls they had built together, their dreams illuminated by the gentle glow of the great ziggurat that connected their earthly home to the realm of the gods. The urban revolution was complete. The age of cities had begun, and human civilization would never be the same.